roll. So this is Eat Right for your body type, or in other words, or in scientific terms, your body type is called your somatotype. And this is a field that I've been very, very interested in and practiced in for a very long time. But before I jump into that, just a really quick introduction, since most of you on the call don't know me, since this is being sponsored through the Scottsdale Martin Pear Jewish Community Center. Again, thank you so much for hosting this and for giving me the opportunity to jump into your community. Again, my name's Benjamin Brown. I have a master's degree in clinical nutrition and exercise and wellness, and I've been a fitness and nutrition coach for going on 20 years now. Most importantly, I'm a husband and father of 3, and if you are a member of the J, invariably you've seen either myself, my wife Christina, and or all of my 3 children running around the J at all different times of the day, because the Jewish Community Center has been a huge part of our life for the past probably going on 15 years now. All 3 of my children have come up through preschool. My wife, who started volunteering in the preschool, in the parent-teacher group, and then inevitably became the head of member services here for a few years at the J, and is now helping me with my nutrition coaching and is instrumental in helping our business grow. And so very, very surreal to join forces here. But as I mentioned, with our body type, with nutrition, this is something I've been practicing for a long time. And I was fortunate enough, just to give you a little bit of a context, I've been fortunate enough to study with some of the best in the world in terms of nutrition and strength training and health. And really circa 2007, I started studying with a world-renowned strength coach by the name of Charles Poliquin. And he had developed a very unique body composition methodology that he termed biosignature. It was basically our biological signature by virtue of how we store body fat and what the implications were of how and where we store body fat relative to our goals. And so what this biosignature was a body composition analysis that measured 12 different skin fold sites on the body. And what we did is we used calipers to determine those skin fold thickness. And the conclusion that Charles came to after thousands upon thousands of measurements with athletes and with general population was that each respective site was somewhat reflective of different hormonal storage patterns. In other words, hormones like insulin and the management of insulin or mismanagement of insulin can cause fat storage in areas like our love handles, which some of us experience. Similarly, cortisol, which is a stress hormone, can cause fat storage around our belly button area. Growth hormone, testosterone, estrogen, and so on and so forth. So we all producing these hormones in different amounts for different reasons based on genetics and based on lifestyle, which in conjunction with our genetics cause us to store body fat in different areas, as well as express different genes that we're predisposed to. So you can kind of think about this body fat testing as a crude body fat blueprint for how and where we store body fat and our hormonal profiles. And based on those profiles, what we should do about it from a nutrition, a training, and a supplementation standpoint. So between 2007 and 2016, I made this a very predominant part of my coaching business to the degree that I did thousands of different measurements. And do me a favor, guys, if you're tuning in via Zoom, just make sure you mute yourself. Super appreciative. So I did thousands of different measurements over the years, observed hundreds of different individuals' diets, and I personally came up with a few really foundational principles that are substantiated by scientific literature that were recurring amongst every single client experience success in their program. And so if it's okay with you, what I'll do is I'll share those with you in just a little bit. But before I do that, I want to make sure to share a little more about the different body types and how it may impact what you choose to eat and how you choose to exercise. So let's jump into that. I apologize if you can hear behind me. Again, I'm officing right now out of the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, and there's of course a preschool right behind me. They're just finishing up lunch, and so bear with me if there's a little bit of background noise. So, as our mothers always told us, we are a special snowflake. right? We all are different as we're all as different as our fingerprint. We all have different genetics that determine certain components of our personality, our brain chemistry, our physiology, our anatomical structure, right? Our waist circumference, our hip circumference, our shoulder girth, and our height, and so on and so forth, our metabolic rates, our blood type. And you may have heard different diets based on these different genetic predispositions. And because of these differences, we all have a unique formula for how we should be eating, how we should be exercising based on this individuality. But it's not just genetics. And this is where the term biochemical individuality comes in. The biochemical individuality is our genetics coupled with our lifestyle and our environment to various exposures. So what's often said in this context is that our genetics load the gun, but our lifestyle pulls the trigger. And so we're all predisposed to certain genetic conditions, to various diseases, to heart disease and diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and again, storing body fat in different areas and so on and so forth. But that's not really the limiting factor. The limiting factor is how we use our lifestyle and our environment, the people we surround ourselves with, our physical activity levels, our daily nutrition, our mindset, to influence how those genetics are expressed. I hope that makes sense for you. And so this brings us into our respective body types, or our somatotypes, as I alluded to. And where this came from was back in the 1940s, a researcher by the name of William Sheldon. He tried to classify people into 3 distinct categories, correlating their body type with their psychology, with their personality traits. And he called these somatotypes, which have now been basically called somatotypes, again, based on their physical and psychological characteristics. And there's 3 different types that he came up with to categorize people. And those are called your ectomorph, your mesomorph, or you're an endomorph. And so what we have observed here is that the body types, the categorical body types, are fairly good descriptors of different people. We all can fall into some category, predominantly into one category or another, even though we're hybrid of multiple types. But with the personality traits, William Sheldon's research really didn't pan out, but it was the body types, these somatotypes, that stuck. And so what we're going to do here really quickly is we're going to go through a very crude, sort of generalized quiz to help you determine your body type. And then we'll speak to each respective body type so you can get a little more information about what it might mean for you. And so the first question, and again, this is an oversimplified but easily determinable way to determine your potential somatotype. Now, what I want to preface this with is I want you to think about your body type, not today, but I want you to think about your body type post high school, sort of post adolescence. Let's think end of high school, beginning of college. So through puberty, we've developed, but we haven't really been overly exposed to all of the modern day stressors, if you will, the kids, the job, the business, the finances, all of the things that can load the gun from a genetic standpoint. Okay, so think about your body then, not so much now, and that will help you determine better your body type. So the first question is, my upper body is, and you're just going to select 1, 2, or 3 for each of these 5 questions, and write it down if you want, or just note it in your mind. But the first question is, my upper body is, 1, pretty much straight. So my upper body's pretty much straight. My upper body's V-shaped, or my upper body's pear-shaped or round. So go ahead and select whichever you think applies to you specifically post-adolescence. Okay, number 2 is, if I wrap my thumb and middle finger around my wrist, the 2 fingers, either they overlap, they just barely touch, or they don't touch. So you can see for mine, if you can see me, my fingers just barely touch. So I would mark down a 2 for that one. Okay, so go ahead and mark that down. Question number 3 is, what is your unique body type? oh, I'm sorry, question number 3 is if jeans don't fit, it's because they are 1, loose in the waist and the glutes. Number 2, they're loose in the waist but tight in the glutes. Number 3, they're tight in the waist and the glutes. The glutes is your butt. Okay, so go ahead and select whichever one's appropriate for you. Question number 4. For men, if shirts don't fit, it's because they are 1, loose in the chest and the waist and the waist. 2, they're tight in the chest but loose in the waist. Or 3, they're tight in the waist. Okay, but for women, my arms are either 1, skinny, 2, toned, 3, soft. Okay, got that answer? Last one. My body tends to 1, stay skinny, 2, be lean yet muscular, 3 is carry a bit of extra fat. Okay, so we've gone through 5 questions. You should have 5 numbers, either 1, 2, or 3. They don't necessarily all need to be the same, but I want you to count up your answers and just determine how many 1s, how many 2s, how many 3s. So if you determine that you were mostly 1s, you are classified as an ectomorph. If you have mostly 2s, predominantly 2s, you are classified as a mesomorph, and 3s is an endomorph. Now, in all likelihood, you showed up somewhere in between, but you may have classified yourself exclusively as one of these somatotypes, which is just fine. And you can obviously see, and hopefully your perception of your body type aligns with whatever you see here in this image of an ectomorph obviously being longer and leaner, a mesomorph a little more muscular and fit, and an endomorph having a little more bigger bone structure, a little more body fat. So let's go through exactly what each of these types are classified as, and then we'll talk nutrition. And so the ectomorph is the naturally long and lean person. These are the endurance athletes. They're the models. They're the basketball players. They're the swimmers. These are the people that can eat whatever they want, so to speak. They're not necessarily predisposed to store body fat, nor are they necessarily going to put on large amounts of muscle mass, regardless of how much they eat or how much they strength train. So these are, in the sort of gym language, these are the quote unquote hard gainers that have a hard time putting on weight. And they've been said to have kind of a fast or a high metabolism. Now, the mesomorphs, these are the football players. These are the naturally lean, more muscular people, men and women, that have a relatively easy time both putting on muscle mass and losing body fat. They have more of a flexible metabolism, so to speak, in terms of they do really well with more carbs and or more fat. They have more freedom with their nutrition, and they have a relatively easy time both gaining muscle and losing fat. And this is, as I said, it's the person that can put on muscle mass, a solid torso, medium bone structure, relatively low body fat levels, a wider shoulder, and narrower waist. And then lastly is the endomorph. This is the person that feels plagued with their body composition in terms of being quote unquote big boned and they're big boned, they're predisposed to storing body fat, to some degree have a harder time building muscle, and really, as I said, might struggle more with their body weight because it's been said that they have quote unquote a slower metabolism. Okay, so hopefully that aligns with however you classified yourself, and what you've observed to be true, at least when you were at that stage of your life, kind of that post-high school, pre-college, and whatever body type you represented probably lines up to some degree with that. So what we found, though, is that it really is not binary in terms of you're either 1, 2, or 3. There's really hundreds of different body types as they fit in with these categories. And so you can see simply from a sports standpoint is these different sports generally attract athletes with different body types. And you can see all of the different sports here in this image and how these generalized body types fit within these somatotype categories. So usually it's some hybrid of one or the other. right? You have some traits of one category, some traits of another categories is typically what we find. And really what it means is that some bodies are more efficient at burning energy for fuel. Some bodies are less efficient and tend to store more energy as fat. Some bodies are really efficient at building muscle. Some bodies are simply inefficient at building muscle. So let's talk about what it means from a nutritional standpoint and what it could mean for you and what we generally see relative to these body types. And so obviously you have the naturally lean ectomorph, and it's a continuum here of the ectomorph to the endomorph. And so what we've observed is that the ectomorphs, obviously we all know someone that is naturally long and lean and feel like they can eat, or it seems that they can eat whatever they want and get away with it because they don't store an ounce of fat. So this is the ectomorph. They naturally do really well with higher amounts of carbohydrate and lower amounts of fat. Whereas the endomorph on the other end of the spectrum here really doesn't do very well with high amounts of carbohydrate. They tend to have much poorer blood sugar regulation. Again, don't manage carbohydrates very well, but do tend to do better with higher amounts of fats. And interestingly enough, we do see these different discrepancies in different cultures around the world. And so what we might see from an endomorph standpoint is someone from more of an Inuit or Alaskan, more of an Eskimo type genealogy that has, whose DNA is built on eating higher amounts of animal fat and having not a lot of access to carbohydrate versus someone who's of African descent, perhaps, who's consumed a lot more grains over their lifetime with their ancestors, but hasn't had a lot of access to animal fats, as an example. And so naturally in their DNA is the ability to metabolize one or the other more effectively. But within that, even within that is, again, I talked to how our genetics predispose us to certain conditions, but it's not the end all be all, because studies have actually shown with respect to slow and fast metabolizers that despite the fact that one somatotype might be a faster metabolizer than another and do better with carbs than another and vice versa, in reality, the discrepancies are actually quite small. And so our genetic makeup isn't our fault, but it's actually our responsibility. It's our responsibility with our lifestyle, with our environment, with our daily habits to do whatever it is that we can to ensure that our genes express themselves in the way that we want. And this is where our nutrition comes into play. I'm going to speak relative to some of the observations that I've made through the years of coaching people, and how after observing thousands of different body composition and hundreds of different dieting methodology and different diet types and different athletes and individuals, these are the kind of foundational principles that we see at play day in and day out that are going to make the biggest difference as it pertains to your health, your lifestyle, your genetic expression, your ability to lose body fat, your ability to gain muscle mass, and so on and so forth. And only after these have been mastered should we really be worrying about our unique body type and what it means from a macronutrient standpoint, from a supplement standpoint, and so on and so forth. So let's jump into that. And so when it comes to nutrition, regardless of our goal, calories matter most. So if our goal is to lose weight, we need to find a way to create a calorie deficit. Now that can mean from eating less food and or exercising more. This is really the foundation of the pyramid when it comes to how to make changes to our body composition. And anything after that is higher up higher up on the iceberg, so to speak, right? So calories are really at the foundation of this pyramid. Is everything that we need to do first needs to revolve around how we manage calories. And interestingly enough, one of the reasons why diets are successful initially is because regardless of whatever the dogma associated with the respective diet. So if we do paleo, if we do Atkins, if we do South Beach, if we do Mediterranean, if we do keto, if we do intermittent fasting, if we do whatever the shakes and bar diet is, I don't even know. There's so many. If we do supplements, the main driver that helps people be successful, at least initially, with these diets is the fact that what do? They help us manage our calories by creating some level of restriction. So cut out all your carbs, or significantly reduce your fats, or paleo is cut out all of these foods, or Whole30 is cut out all of these foods, or intermittent fasting is don't eat between these times or only eat between these times, which invariably helps us manage our calories. I think that's really, really important concept to understand for you guys, because that is the biggest driver. So truthfully, it doesn't really matter how we do it, as long as we do it in a way that's realistic for us and our lifestyle. And so beyond that, then that's where we can start to get into macros, macronutrients. So macro stands for macronutrients. That's our protein, our carbohydrate, our fat intake. And this is more where eating to our body type, eating to our goals come into play. Micronutrients, this is our vitamins and our minerals of making sure we're eating a more diverse diet of fruits and vegetables and whole grains. And then nutritional timing, this is more like intermittent fasting, how we're fueling yourself in and around our workouts. And then of course, supplementation is at the top of the iceberg, as in the least important component. So if you're turning to supplements to help you burn fat, like Garcinia cambogia or green tea leaf extract or raspberry ketones or all of these Dr. Oz nonsensical supplements, then you are wasting your time and money because you're not focusing on the bottom of the pyramid. So we're going to focus on the bottom of the pyramid, and I'm going to give you some a four-step strategy here to help you do just that. Now, the first step here within managing our calories is there's multiple ways to do this. First and foremost, and probably the most objective or quantitative way that I recommend everyone do at some point, is to track their calories. Now, there's a slew of calorie tracking apps that you can choose from MyFitnessPal to Chronometer to Lose It to, I think, Noom is one of the newer ones. But what's important here is that you actually take some accountability, take some responsibility, and you practice and develop the skills to actually determine and create more awareness around what you're consuming on a daily basis. So then you're more likely to have an understanding of how those calories are adding up, and based on that, start to make better decisions. Because you've got the built-in accountability, you're less likely to reach for that handful of almonds or M&Ms or have that second glass of wine or whatever it is, because you now can see objectively what's happening with your calorie intake. And frankly, if you're having a hard time losing weight and then you have a quantitative view of how many calories you're consuming, then potentially it's as simple as saying, okay, well, what can I do to consume less? I can drink less alcohol. I can stop snacking so much throughout the day. I can reduce my carbohydrate intake and increase my veggie intake, and so many different options. And that's the way that I would suggest going about it, rather than subscribing to some overly restrictive dieting methodology. Now, within that, as I alluded to, is minimize your snacking. So if you don't want to track, or you've tracked in the past and it hasn't worked for you, that's totally cool. What you can do is just commit to 3 to 4 structured meals per day. And what we've seen to be so beneficial about that is actually counterintuitive to what we've been told over the years of eating more per day to stoke the metabolism, right? Eat 5 to 6 times a day to stoke the metabolism. But in reality, what the research shows us is that actually causes people to eat a lot more calories, because the nature of the foods that we tend to snack on are very calorically dense. Think pretzels and chips and nuts and seeds and candy and very calorically dense foods, which cause us to eat too much. And so instead, if we can stick to 3 to 4 meals, allowing 4 to 5 hours in between, then it helps us manage our calorie intake. It also helps us manage our hunger and satiety and the hormones that drive hunger and satiety. So it helps create a better relationship between the brain and the stomach, and then the hormones that are produced around our meals, like leptin and ghrelin, that tell us when we're hungry and when we're satisfied. And it's important to have an intimate relationship with those so you actually know if and when you're hungry and what it really means for you. Is most people are afraid of getting a little bit hungry because they think it, because they think it means low blood sugar, or they're burning muscle mass or something ridiculous like that. But it's actually not the case. Hunger is a very good sign that we're using fat as fuel. So we can minimize our snacking. And then very simply, what I recommend a lot of people do, and this might be helpful for you, is simply have a start and a stop time for our eating window. And it might be starting eating at 8 a.m. and stopping eating at 8 p.m. to allow us a 12-hour fasting window and a 12-hour eating window, because what most people do is they eat from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed. And for a lot of people, they eat the majority of their calories at night. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, depending on how many calories they're consuming. But for most people, in my experience, shortening their eating window at night, or having some hard and fast rules about when you stop eating, is going to be extremely beneficial to help you cut out all of the excessive calories that can come in after the kids go to bed and when you just want some chill time and Netflix and so on. So I hope that's helpful for you. Now, number two is managing your protein intake. One of the important things to know is, as we get older, one is our ability to digest and absorb protein is reduced. But the other thing to understand is that our protein needs are actually increased because we need more muscle protein synthesis. We need more opportunities to drive protein into the cells. Therefore, we need more protein, especially as we get older and when we lose muscle mass. So what we see happen is that as we get older, we lose muscle mass, we gain fat mass. What happens for most people is they gain weight year by year, which means not only are they losing muscle, but they're gaining more and more fat, replacing that muscle plus some. And that's not a good thing, because body fat's a very metabolically active tissue that can create a lot of inflammatory processes in the body and express those genes in the ways that we do not want. And so by consuming more protein more frequently throughout the day, we can help support more muscle mass. We can help manage blood sugar more effectively. We can help support our cognitive function and our immune system. By supporting our blood sugar, we're making better decisions from meal to meal. We're more satiated or have more feelings of fullness from meal to meal, so we're less likely to snack. And so many different reasons. So it's so important as we get older to not only eat a lot of protein, but likely to increase our protein intake, which frankly, most people do the opposite. Most people start eating less and less as they get older. And so it's very clear that that's something we need to flip the switch on. So for women, I recommend 3 to 4 meals of 30 grams of protein. And for most of us, if you look the palm of your hand, or about the size of a deck of cards, that's 25 to 30 grams of protein, depending on the person. Some of us have bigger mitts than others, but for the average person, the palm of their hand is probably about 25 or 30 grams of protein. So for a lot of us, that seems like a lot of protein, or it's significantly more than what we are already consuming, in which case this is certainly something that you'd want to make a goal to start to work up to, specifically with that first meal of the day, because it's a major driver of stimulating what we call neurotransmitters, or brain chemicals that help us feel good, that help us make good decisions, that keep us switched on, that give us that dopamine or neural drive to feel focused and energized throughout the day. And we know that meal one, by eating more protein at that meal, not only does it do that, but it also ramps up our immune system. So really ton of positive benefits to eating more protein. For men, 3 to 4 meals per day of 50 grams of protein. So that would be, 2 palms of protein, or 2 decks of cards at each of those meals. Again, that does seem like a lot, but for most people, it should be about 30 to 35% of their total calorie intake. And we're woefully short of that in the standard American diet. Most Americans are consuming somewhere around 17 or 18%, if that, which means the remaining, 80 82, 83% of our calorie intake is coming from carbohydrate and fat. And I know it's not coming from fruits and vegetables and whole grains and avocado and olive oil. It's coming from highly processed, refined, snacky, trans fat laden foods, which is not a good thing for us. And so by eating more protein, we can weed out some of those overly processed carbs and fats, and again, help stabilize our energy and all of the other benefits that I alluded to. Now, number 3, and I'm kind of rushing through this to some degree. I want to make sure I respect your guys' time, and I want to make sure I have some time for questions. So number 3 is movement. Now, movement is something that I believe is grossly overlooked as a primary driver of health. As we all know, we should be moving more, but none of us are doing it. And so my suggestions and sort of the literature supports us accumulating 10 to 15,000 steps a day. Now, I will absolutely say that 15,000 steps is aggressive. This would be the equivalent, 10,000 steps for most people is the equivalent of about 5 miles of walking throughout the day, which is fairly easy to accumulate if you build it into your daily habits and daily structure, but that requires a high level of prioritization. So you should start with whatever's reasonable for you. It could just be a 15-minute walk per day. My suggestion to get started is after every single meal, because what do? We tend to have a meal and then we kind of putz around and we might scroll social media, and we usually have some downtime. There's a great time to help us improve our digestion, help us get those steps in, and get out and move for 15 to 20 minutes, especially if you're tuning in here from Arizona. Our weather is absolutely beautiful right now. So there's no excuses not to. We get sunlight on the face. There's a big benefit of getting sunlight in our eyes from a vitamin D standpoint. And, one of the major benefits here with movement is, especially when we're talking about blood sugar. So I mentioned type 2 diabetes in terms of genetic expression. Well, one of the things we know that's so profound about movement, now this is walking, it's riding the bike, it's swimming, it's any exercise really, and it doesn't have to be intense exercise, is the more movement we do, the better we do with helping us absorb our sugars, or the sugars that are floating around in our bloodstream. Now, if you have any understanding of blood sugar, you know that we need insulin, which is hormone that the body produces to help us drive sugars into the cells. It's almost the key to the lock in the cells to drive the sugars in. But when we exercise, we produce a receptor in the cells called GLUT4. What it does is it comes up to the surface of the cell and it basically opens up the doors of the cell to allow glucose to freely. So these are carbs, these are sugars in our bloodstream, whatever we consume from our food. So whether it's fruit or juice or rice or potatoes or bread, when they're broken down into sugars, they're in the bloodstream. Well, these GLUT4 receptors open up the cells and they allow the free transport of sugars into the cells in the absence of insulin, which is such a remarkable component of the human body, because so many people have insulin resistance. And this is where we eat sugars, and the body produces insulin, but it's constantly producing so much insulin that the cells become resistant to it. They almost become blind to the insulin, so you can't absorb the sugars. And so especially for people that have a hard time managing sugars or trying to lose weight, exercise is paramount. It's absolutely paramount. And that's why I do recommend 10 to 15,000 steps a day is probably one of the most important things that we can be doing. Now, lastly, and this will align with the first 3, and then I'll wrap this up and I'll take a couple questions, is choosing high satiety foods. Now, these are foods that, remember, we talked about managing our calories. We talked about high protein intake, and we talked about movement. Now, with respect to managing our calories and high protein, is we also want to choose foods that are going to keep us satiated for long periods of time. These are foods that are going to include protein, they're going to include fiber, and they're going to include water. Now, fiber, as we all know, is bulk. So when we eat foods with fiber, think fruits, vegetables, whole grains, supplements. It helps create stretch the receptors in the stomach, which signals the brain to say, hey, we're full. And most of the foods that have a lot of fiber are very low in calorie intake, right? highly fibrous vegetables like cruciferous vegetables, broccoli and cabbage and celery and all of these vegetables that you can eat a lot of them, you can get full, but it's very low calories. And so we want to choose foods that have protein, they have fiber, and of course, water. Vegetables have a lot of water. Water fills us up. It's obviously good for so many different reasons. And this is where my 5S formula, it's actually not my formula, but one of my mentors, speaks a lot to this, but the 5S formula for satiety, and these are foods that you can build out your meals 3 to 4 times a day as a general framework for, including things like soups, salads, shakes, scrambles, and stir fries. So when you think 5S, soup, salad, shakes, tongue twister, scrambles, and stir fries, right? Because soups, they have a lot of water. We can have a lot of vegetables in there, so it's going to have a lot of fiber. Of course, we can put in whatever leftover beef or chicken or beans or something like that in there that's going to take up a lot of space, but with a very low calorie load. Similarly, salads. This is what I call the KSS, the kitchen sink salad. We take a big bowl, we put in a bunch of greens, chop up a bunch of leftover vegetables, throw in our protein source, whether that's just a can of tuna or some leftover chicken or whatever it is. And we've got a high voluminous meal that, again, has a relatively low calorie load as compared to some of the things we would normally have for lunch, like a big Subway sandwich and chips and a soda or something like that, right? Shakes, we can do a big shake with a protein powder, a lot of liquid, a lot of vegetables, some fruit in there. Scrambles, obviously eggs, vegetables, and then stir fries. Same idea, is it's a protein source plus lots of vegetables. So I think you get the idea there. Ideally, you're revolving your meals around those 5 S's, which is naturally going to weed out some of the foods that are higher in carbohydrate. Again, nothing wrong with carbs, but if we're trying to manage our calories and we're trying to create a lot of satiety with a relatively low amount of calories, then it's going to be in our best interest to keep our fats a little bit lower and really manage our processed carb intake. So that's things like breads and pastas and pastries and so on and so forth. And so if we're really dialing into the weeds with respect to our body type, if someone's in great shape and they're really looking to optimize their nutrition relative to their body type, so if you're a long and lean person and you want to be able to eat in a way that's supportive of, let's say, putting on muscle mass, then you're probably going to want to eat closer to 55%. So this is for the ectomorph, 55% carbs, 25% protein, and 25% fat. And conversely, if you're a bigger bone person and you're trying to lose some body fat, then in all likelihood, you're probably going to respond best to start with around 25% carbs, 35% protein, 40% fat, and then adjust there. But most importantly, as you know, is calories. So within that is just understanding you need to create a calorie deficit. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, obviously, our daily hydration, our stress management, our sleep, our strength training, our social support, the people we surround ourselves with, our positive thinking. All of these things are, I would say, equally important to our health and our longevity as our nutrition, as our body composition. So make sure you're taking those into account. And if you have any questions around this topic or any other questions around your nutrition, please do me a favor and let me know. In fact, I do have a special offer for anyone that's tuning into this recording. I'm offering a free nutrition strategy call. So all you need to do, and I would suggest jumping on this as soon as possible, just shoot me a text message at my number here. And just let me know that you're interested in the free nutrition strategy call. But I also have, so make sure you collect that number real quick because I'm about to change the slide. So do a quick screenshot. And then I do, for those of you joining in that are watching this, that are not familiar with the Martin Pear Jewish Community Center, they have been kind enough to have an offer to join, a no registration fee, first month free. As I said, the Jewish Community Center is the home away from home for myself and my family. My kids have essentially been raised here. My wife has been employed here. It is our community and is full of wonderful people, an amazing gym, as you can see, an incredible facility. They also are offering, when you join, 2 free 30-minute personal training sessions. So it really is a remarkable place that I would strongly encourage you to take advantage of if you're in the Scottsdale area and you want a wonderful place to not only train, but to bring your family. Then there's no better place. Additionally, if you're tuning in and you are a member of the J, well, then they are offering 3 30-minute sessions of training for just $99. They've got some great trainers here. Again, a phenomenal facility. And so I hope that's been helpful for you guys. I'm going to stop the share here. I'm going to jump back in if there's any questions, and then I will let you guys on your way.